When you're fed up with fighting food and your body, join us here. I'm Allie Shapiro, creator of the Truce with Food program and your host for Insatiable, where we explore the hidden aspects of fighting our food, our weight, and our bodies, and dive deep into nutrition science and true whole health. Fair warning, this is not your parents' health care. This is a big rebel yell to those who crave meaning, hunger for truth, and whose lust for life is truly insatiable. Believe me, freedom awaits. Welcome, everybody, to Season 8, Episode 5 of Insatiable. This season's theme is consistency. It's no secret that consistency is the key to success. Many of us have so much health knowledge and are aware of the latest and greatest food research and have the best of intentions, and then real life happens. We fall off track, we lose motivation, and we get discouraged. Convention tells us consistency is about willpower, discipline, and hard work. But research in adult development theory points elsewhere. 15 years ago, I discovered functional medicine and reversed my irritable bowel syndrome, depression, and a host of issues. I was amazed at the power of food as medicine and felt amazing. But even all these great results couldn't stop my binging and overeating. My quest to discover became, why can't I stick with this? Which led me to grad school to study adult development and how we change ingrained patterns and behaviors for good. I came to realize inconsistency is a symptom, just like depression and binging. It's not the problem, but has various root causes depending on the individual. Not only is falling off track an invitation into deeper healing and radical results, but I found that when it comes to consistency, a lot of the common beliefs we have around being consistent are what actually causes us to fall off track. In this Insatiable season, we will look at inconsistency as a symptom, not a problem. We'll explore what happens after the novelty of some new plan or book that we have read has worn off, and why real life trips us up. What are we really talking about with real life? What are the various root causes of why we lose motivation, want to be, quote, bad with our food and self-care, and tell ourselves, chuck it, F it. So today, we are going to be talking about how low expectations actually cause us to fall off track. And we have the brilliant Sas Petherick, who is a self-doubt researcher, coach, and host of the Courage and Spice podcast, and also a previous Insatiable guest and one of my dear friends who I admire immensely. She also mentors coaches and other brave-hearted business owners. Sas helps you move from understanding the root causes of your self-doubt to cultivating tangible, sustainable self-belief. And she walks her talk, and she's rooted in research, which is the best combination to me, the practical and the academic. Sas, thanks so much for being here.
What a total pleasure, Allie. I could talk to you all day, as you know. So this is a total labor of love for me to be here.
Oh, good. Well, I know everyone's going to get so much out of this today. So I want to start with what kind of gave me the idea for this, and especially to have you on, was you had a near-death experience just a couple of months ago, and it revealed, after the experience, revealed some stories that were causing low expectations for you. But I would like you to first tell us about that near-death experience and how you came out of it.
Yeah, I did. I almost died twice in the same 24-hour period. I've had a heart condition my whole life, which I inherited from my mother's side of the family, and there is a number of women in our family who have variants on this condition. But it basically means that I have a dicky ticket, right? I have a heart that doesn't quite function as normal. And what happened just before Christmas last year was that my heart stopped. So it had slowed down so much to the point that it wasn't able to keep going without assistance. And what happened for me, what I experienced, was that I passed out, and having felt quite unwell and fatigued for a number of weeks, I got to the point where I just couldn't actually remain conscious. And I was very lucky. A very close friend who lives 5 minutes away called an ambulance immediately, kind of just had that feeling that something was really wrong. In the UK where I live, there is a thing called the National Health Service, which means that all healthcare is free at the point of need. And so I was whisked off to a specialist heart institute with leading researchers and geneticists and pacing guys and everything you could ever want. And so the stress of any kind of health incident, I know, is compounded so much in different parts of the world when there is these added components of how will I afford this? Am I insured? Am I covered? In the UK, we are so lucky that that is not the case. We have a kind of socialist health system where everyone who needs help gets it. And so I was really lucky. I had heart surgery pretty much 24 hours after I first collapsed. And I now have a little robot that is attached to my heart, and it monitors my heart rate, my heart rhythm, and it keeps me at a regular heartbeat. And it means that if I go through what's called a kind of tachycardic response, where my heart rate gets really, really fast, it will kick in and defibrillate me without me having to wait for an ambulance. So it's this kind of really quite crazy and amazing advanced piece of technology that was given to me by my surgeon and a pretty kind of like, it wasn't a very dramatic piece of surgery. I was awake for it, which felt very dramatic, but the process itself is quite standard. It's quite a kind of known and very well established solution to the kind of heart problems I have. And so I now have this robot. And yeah, I had 2 instances in that period where my heart stopped and I lost consciousness. I had defibrillated, pads were out, and I sort of was, brought back to life. It was quite an odd experience. It taught me a lot about fear and about how when we are actually in the context of a very real and present fear, that I didn't actually feel any fear. I wasn't really that fearful when things were going on. I was just in it. I was noticing what was happening. I felt really, really present for it when I was conscious. And it was only in the kind of moments afterwards, in the hours afterwards, when I started to think about what almost had happened, what may still happen, that I actually experienced fear. And so I was kind of left with the sense of, gosh, fear's always mistimed, isn't it? It's never really when you need, it's never really present when you would expect it to be. And I guess that's because our bodies have this immense intelligence and are able to, when we're actually in an experience of true threat, there is all of this other stuff that's going on to kind of keep us alive and thriving, that it's almost like we're flooded with probably all kinds of hormones and chemicals and what have you, that we don't get to feel any fear because our bodies just kind of can't handle those 2 things at once. So yeah, it was a really interesting experience. I did kind of die, I guess is the phrase. It feels kind of odd to say that, but I did, stop breathing. My heart stopped, everything kind of stopped. And I had some quite odd experiences when that took place. I just felt myself dissolving is the word that keeps coming to me. I'm still kind of processing it. It's about 6 months since it all happened, but there was this very kind of clear sense for me of dissolving, of the sense that I was just retreating, that there was some essential part of me that was going somewhere. I never found out where. There was no kind of beardy reckoning. There was no white light. There was no tunnel. There was nothing like that. But there was this sense that something was shifting. And then I was kind of brought back and it stopped. So it was a very odd sensation. Wouldn't recommend it. Yeah.
Well, I think what's important for the audience to understand is your mother actually died from this heart condition.
She did, yeah. Yeah, she died 17 years ago. She was 53. And I'm turning 46 in a few short months. And I think it's so interesting that we're talking about this idea of stories and kind of how stories sort of limit us. And perhaps we end up believing that the story is more powerful than our lived experience. And often I think, and you and I have talked about this since, but I think one of the things that I learned was that our stories are sometimes in the shadow, right? The stories are kind of unconscious. We're not even really sure sometimes what the story is that we are actually living. So we might have these kind of surface stories around, like, oh, this is the story I'm living today, or this is what I'm making up about this circumstance. But I think sometimes there are these deeper undercurrents, unconscious stories, unconscious beliefs, things that we have kind of buried quite deeply, and they don't really surface often until perhaps we're ready to look at them, or something happens where they come up. And I think that was my experience, was ever since my mum died, and she died very suddenly, there was no warning to it at all. I've had this sense that I will only probably live to her age when she died, which was 53. So I've kind of had this ticking clock running in the back of my life as I've been going through things. And one of the things that I realized when I was in recovery, when I was quite heavily dependent on my partner and my friends that are around me, where I really wasn't able to do very much, was just how foreign it was to me to be reliant on other people. That I had spent most of my adult life trying to kind of outrun this ticking clock and pack a shit ton in. Can I swear on this podcast?
Of course.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I had packed like a shit ton of stuff into my life, and I've always kind of run at quite a fast pace. You know, I like to think quickly and speak quickly and get shit done, and I'm very kind of action oriented. I'm quite a productive person, and I've always sort of worn that as a bit of a badge of honor. And I realized in the moments where actually there was nothing required of me, that one of the stories I had been perhaps unconsciously living was that I had to pack all of this stuff in because I didn't expect to live very long. And so there was this like very odd, quiet, but very tangible and quite profound realization that now that I had this robot heart, the words my surgeon used were, you get a different story to your mum. And I mean, for a surgeon, and you know, he was a posh British surgeon, right? So kind of, you know, cut off at the emotions, one would assume. But for him to use that phrase, it really touched me. There was something very poetic about that. You get a different story to your mum. And, you know, the recognition from him and from the surgical team that I was carrying that story into the surgery that I needed to be awake for, that they really understood that was something that was both physically quite challenging, and it was not a pain-free experience, but also that there was a lot of stuff that was coming into that operating theatre. It wasn't just me. But I definitely felt this deep empathy for that. It was acknowledged several times by different people in a way that it was clear to me that they really understood that I was a whole person coming into that theatre, not just a case. And yeah, just to recognize that, and part of what was left on the operating table was that story that I had been living. So I'm now expected to live a long life. There is no reason why I shouldn't live to be a cranky old lady, which I'm quite happy about. And yeah, I have some medication and some other kind of just care things to take into account. But really, my heart is kind of restored to that of a normal 46-year-old woman. And so it was this very odd experience of having a story that has been playing out to sort of get a brief understanding, that's what that was all about. And then, but it doesn't matter anymore. So it's been very interesting. The last 6 months have been very much about, so who am I now? What's my story now? And now that the kind of need for me to operate at that level of being quite fast paced and things. What does that mean for me now that the reason for that is no longer present? So it's been an interesting old time.
There's so much that I think is, I mean, I love because you do story revision work similar. I mean, we love the same theorists, and
Yeah.
you are someone who's worked through so many stories of your own and has come out. And I love that you're talking, this is part of what we want to talk about is these unconscious stories. And I think what's fascinating, and for people especially listening, is who would have connected? You would think that this heart condition that your mom passed from and that you have struggled with on and off, you would think the story might be something about your body or whatnot, yet it was driving so many of your day-to-day behaviors, right? Of
Yeah.
packing things in that people wouldn't necessarily correlate, right? And I think that's what's so challenging about these unconscious stories is they create these identities that we're like, well, this is just how I am.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like, no, I've learned to be this way for some reason.
It's such an interesting point that you're raising, because I think that's the realization I've come to as well, that sometimes I think identity is just such a bloody layered and fascinating concept, right? Like the idea of who we are, because it's always changing. And I'm always struck by, I remember listening to an interview that the poet David White did with Krista Tippett on the On Being podcast years ago now. But he said that one of the ways that he had maintained or was learning to kind of maintain and to nourish the relationship that he had with his teenage daughter was whenever he was about to go into the room that she was in, to maintain a level of curiosity about, well, who is she now? Right? Even though he'd seen her the night before or they'd had a conversation earlier. And I don't know, maybe it's only poets that can remain that conscious of things like that. But but that idea of being curious about, well, who is this person now, because she was changing so much. And I kind of really appreciate that idea that often, we think we are these constant things, these constant beings that we sort of go, this is the person I am, or kind of, this is me, this is what I do. When actually what I'm finding, and perhaps this is partly the work I do, but partly age and experience as well, I'm realizing just how malleable our identity markers can be and how they can be reinforced and enhanced depending on the kind of culture that we are in. So if the culture we spend our time in, and by culture I don't necessarily mean society, it can be like a familial culture, the culture in your marriage, what is valued by a group that you're spending time with. When those things match, when your identity kind of matches the people you're spending time with, I think there is a reluctance to ever change that, right? It's almost like I get reinforced. I get my sense of belonging and of acceptance from staying this way, from staying in this identity.
That's so true because I'm thinking about a story that, has recently been revealed for me is when I was first told, oh, you're probably, I'm pregnant. And I was told, oh, it's probably from menopause, from the chemo. And it was kind of like in like Western medicine is the default culture here, right? And so it was, and I've done so much work around stories, and obviously I've defied Western medicine's expectations for my body before, in terms of reversing a lot of the issues that I had from chemotherapy, including the trauma from it. But I was kind of, to even pursue a natural route, even though I believe in natural medicine, felt so counterculture. And part of me was like, who do you think you are that you can like defy this? Right. And even when I did get pregnant, I was like, I had this hesitation of, I don't want to become this poster child for natural medicine. Like that was kind of I never set out to do that. And I also think, pregnancy is ultimately a mystery. There's also privilege there that I was able to access resources.
Yeah.
But I'm finding with myself, dismiss the work that I've done as a way to kind of stay invisible around some of the success that I've had. And it's revealed not only, I think, getting pregnant has revealed to me in a way how powerful I am, and it's trickled into how safe I can feel with my own visibility, if that makes sense. It's been really fascinating to me. I'm like, oh my God, all this stuff comes up when you my body, I thought I had done all this work, but I still had this very much piece of, oh, you don't have the resilience, you don't have the capabilities of stepping forward and making a
Mm.
statement in a way. And I don't think most people who listen to this podcast or my friends or anyone would ever think that of me, because I am pretty out there with my beliefs, but I'm also, you and I are both very nuanced diplomatic thinkers, I would say, right? Like, I don't think there's one answer for everyone, but
Yeah,
I'm also learning to own what worked for me rather than just
yeah.
dismiss it as a way to not be so visible.
Well, I wonder as well, Ali, if you're finding that you can kind of, it sounds to me anyway, like there's this emerging deeper trust in your body,
Yes, I love that you,
right?
yeah. And I thought I had trusted it a lot.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And I love that you say that, because that's such a clear way of saying it. It's also a trust in my vision for what I want to do with my work moving forward and the statements I want to make, right? It's like,
yeah,
I think sometimes I'm always like, well, this isn't true for everyone. And and I use that noble resistance of
yeah, yeah,
not being that person that's like, go vegan. I mean, I would
yeah.
never be that person. But I think taking a stand. So yeah, it's also a trust in, hey, in the work and in the vision that I see. So thanks for
Yeah,
giving me language for that. It's
yeah.
amazing to me how that trust in ourselves translates so far out into the world.
Well, and I guess I recognize that in myself as well. Like, I think I've always, since I mean, I've always been a heavier person. I just live in a bigger body. And for years and years and years, I just believed that there was something wrong with that. And about 8, 9 years ago, I just went, oh, fuck this. And now I don't know, there's a lot of like, I totally respect anyone's experience of their own body and how they've come to accept, be in it, have a relationship with it. For me, what has been kind of has brought the most peace is the sense of neutrality towards my body. And so that I sort of felt like I'd reached a level of kind of benign trust with my body. Like, I kind of trust it to tell me when something's not right. I'm interested in what's going on for my body. I'm interested in the intelligence of it. But I probably never, it felt like a real stretch to go to that place of self-love and all of that kind of thing. And also I just sort of, it never really landed for me that that was somewhere that I was particularly interested in achieving, that kind of relationship. But now that I have been through this experience, and I as a kind of conscious thinking being, and my intelligence has always been my sort of superpower, right? My ability to understand concepts and make sense of the world has always been the kind of thing that I really identified with, partly because I guess my body doesn't look like the body that the world tells me is worthy, right? But my intelligence was always kind of, I got the positive validation from that. But when I was lying in the hospital bed and it was all about my body, and there was absolutely nothing I could know, there was no concept that was going to save me. there was no way to think my way through this particular health challenge. What I actually had to do was surrender to the intelligence of my body and to the expertise and the knowledge around me, to know that that would also be imperfect and incomplete, but to kind of, I guess, trust faith. There's something about that for me as well, that it was probably going to be okay. Like, even though, I had already been through one kind of state of dying and there was another to come, I do remember quite a very distinct moment where I just thought, okay, I kind of get that there is nothing for me to do here. So I'm just going to try and be as loving and compassionate to myself as I can. Like, it was like, shit, there's nothing for me to do. Like, there is literally nothing. I can't even get out of this bed. I can't even like pee without assistance. So the only thing I can do is kind of give myself some compassion and just trust. And I think that has led me into that place that you're describing too, of like, even with all of the kind of stats and the reality of the world that we live in, and the fact that I'm a white woman, and that meant that, There would be unconscious bias playing out in the relationships with the staff that I had some level of cognizance around. At the same time, there was the sense that I could sort of trust that my body knew what she was doing, right? There was a kind of level of trust that I hadn't ever got to before. And I suspect for me, because I live in my head so much, I kind of needed to have an experience where there was literally nothing I can do for a decent period of time for me to really get it, because I'm quite a slow learner.
I always say I'm stubborn as fuck. That's why I teach
Yeah.
people how to change. I'm like, I had to learn this from the inside out because.
Yeah.
Well, and I love that point you're making, because I think that trust in our bodies, right, it gets so buried, right? We have such low expectations for our bodies because of the cultural noise of what a good body is, a worthy body. It's thin, it's white, it's blonde, it's wealthy, right? That's
it's young and it's wrinkle and cellulite free, and it has no scars or bruises or freckles or moles, and it's hairless. Like there's something kind of almost unnatural, and it's almost like a denial of who we actually are.
Yeah, yeah. So we're going to take a break to hear from our sponsor, but when we come back, I want to pick this up and how this affects, our low expectations for ourselves.
Oh, can't wait.
Yeah. All right. And here we are with a word from our sponsor. It's that time of year again. The live version of my annual group program, Why Am I Eating This Now?, opens for registration August 5th and begins August 13th. This program will help you unlock your keys to consistency with your nutrition goals. And with a small group of 15 people, we will get to the root causes of why you fall off track. Together, we'll transform those patterns and behaviors, no willpower required. To learn more, check out episode 6, season 5, where Why Am I Eating This Now participants, Dr. Tina Bugren and Lourdes Brawley, discuss how using adult development theory, which is not therapy or coaching, made the program so challenging, life-changing, and different from anything they've done before. A year later, they're still seeing results, impact, and feeling further transformed. Here's what they shared. Dr. Bugren said, Why Am I Eating This Now is about getting to the root of things, not hovering on the surface as too many other programs' plans do. As a result, I stopped slipping with my healthy eating and falling into old thought patterns. I got unstuck and have the tools to keep going. 1 year out of the Why Am I Eating This Now process and using the tools, I've lost 20 pounds and kept them off. Lourdes shared, I joined Why Am I Eating This Now because I wanted to move forward in my own self-development. I was able to discover the deeper conflict around my food battle, including how it protects me and how to move forward. I exceeded my own expectations for my progress, was challenged, and I will continue to make these changes in my life. I have been binge-free for over a year post Why Am I Eating This Now? I truly thought I'd never break free from emotional eating, but I have. And I am much bolder in my life. Yes, win-win. If you're ready to work smarter, not harder, to be consistent and reach your nutrition and wellness goals, join us. Full details are at alishapiro.com. Why Am I Eating This Now live program. And make sure you sign up on my list so that you can get the early bird discount. And if you don't want to wait, you can get started today with the self-study program now. What you pay for this will be credited towards the cost of the live program. So why not get started today and start getting relief and clarity? Okay, and we're back. So right before the break, Sas and I were talking about the lack of trust we have in our body because of the buried low expectations that we have for it because of what we've been told is a good body. And Sas, we were, I'm just thinking about this could go like in so many different directions, right? But I think for women especially, if our bodies are our home base, right? And we've both been talking about how this deeper layer of trust has emerged. It affects our self-doubt. It affects what we think we're capable of. And the body is almost where the stories of our bodies and then cutting ourselves off from the wisdom of there is where so much of our lack of trust, I don't know, it's then how we show up in the world.
Yeah.
And it just has this ripple effect that I don't think people would connect certain things like procrastination, right? To,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
or always going and always overpacking my schedule or whatnot. And what we were also talking about that I kind of want to circle back to is these layers of stories. So let's define stories for people, because there's a lot of talk now. It's becoming very trendy to talk about, here's this, Brene Brown's new book out, Dare to Lead. I love her work. And she, it's the story I'm making up here or there. And that's kind of the surface level stories, right?
Yeah.
That are happening, but there's layers to them.
Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think the deeper layers are what create these low expectations. Like, for example, in my field, well, you're always going to have to struggle with your body image, right? The best you can get is feeling neutral and having these flare-ups, or you're going to always have to pay attention to your food rather than getting to the source of why you're struggling with it. And in your field of self-doubt, there's, hacks for procrastination, when you're saying you're procrastinating because you're having doubt, not because you don't know how to manage your time.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, and I think this is the thing, is that our experience of the world and our experience of ourselves is always in context. So it's always in the context of who we spend time with, of the people we surround ourselves with. Sometimes they're people we voluntarily surround ourselves with, and other times we just find ourselves in the mess with them, right? Our work colleagues, for example. And as well, there is a kind of wider context about the stories that our culture gives us, right? That there are these kind of entrenched cultural narratives that often are seeking to exploit our insecurities for profit, right? So the way I see it is that self-doubt has these kind of layers, and it's a bit like kind of concentric circles, or, if you look at a tree stump, you see these sort of rings. And if we're in the middle, there is a familial ring, right? There's a circle around us that, what did we learn about our own self-worth from our families? What were the beliefs that sat around us? What did we inherit from our parents, from their parents, around how the world works? And then, from our teachers, from our friends at school, from our experiences as a growing human, how did we figure out what was true and good and right for us? And how did we get our needs met? And these circles just keep growing, right, as we do, and they extend into the workplace, to educational settings, to deeper romantic relationships and long-standing friendships. And I think what happens is that we miss the intelligence of self-doubt, because it feels so damn uncomfortable. Most of us just want to get away from it as quickly as possible. But actually, there is this very important aspect of self-doubt that I think people miss, which I know you and I totally are in sync with here, that self-doubt has this quite profound role in protecting us from psychological risk. So the very unique and subjective root causes of our self-doubt kind of provide the precise ingredients for our healing, right? So for me, I grew up in a home where there was this hereditary heart condition, where I was the oldest child of two very young immigrants from the UK to New Zealand. And so I grew up with all of their expectations about who I would be and what would matter. So education was kind of the holy grail in my house. And that meant that any sign that I didn't understand things, or that something was beyond me or at my kind of edge of knowing, I didn't feel safe to share. And so I've kind of grown up with, the sort of surface story of, the thing that I'm making up right now in Brene Brown's language is that it's not safe for me to be stupid, or to say that I don't understand. It's not safe for me to say I don't know. But there is a deeper, kind of intergenerational story that I'm also living and continue to live. And I can shine some light on that. And then I get to change it and make conscious choices around it. And I think that's the thing, right, is if we don't go into the layers of it, we can stay at that sort of surface level and feel like, yeah, no, so now I'm doing this other thing. And I guess that's where, these sort of willpower hacks, the kind of get the right mindset, or here's 5 easy steps to stop procrastinating, can help for a little while, but they won't ever help us to really make sense of, to understand and to heal those deeper entrenched stories that may actually be the root cause of what's driving that behavior in the first place.
I love that. It speaks to, because we've been talking about cultural beliefs, and which, you call them, I love that you use the tree metaphor. I often think of them as rushing nesting dolls, right?
Yes,
You just
yeah,
keep popping out. And I think about the healthcare system, especially here in the US. I mean, it's based on war metaphors, right? So, and so many of my clients, their family members have struggled with food or health, right? It's this like thing that's passed down. And part of the work that both you and I do is we get people from the socialized mind, which is these norms and choices that come from the stories of our family, of our culture, of our medical system, education system, right? Even what kind of intelligence is valued, right? There's all of these systems have their own metrics for quote unquote success, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't do those deeper layers, you don't get to jump to the self-authoring, which is the next stage of development where you're consciously choosing, not because, right? Because I found that people often don't know what their choices are because they're in this surround sound of their family, of their culture, of what's quote unquote normal. And because belonging is so important to us, now we don't need to be accepted by everyone, but we do need support, right? It's so hard to get out of that surround sound and know, what do I want to choose for myself? And I think about your heart condition, right? This is what you're going through on one level of the story right now. Like, if I don't have to worry about dying at 53, how am I going to choose to show up now? Like this, all these other choices are open to me that I couldn't even fathom before. And it reorients you to all different types of information and possibilities. And I think when we stay in that just kind of surface level, we're still going to choose something that is socially acceptable in a way. Not always, but we don't know our full range of options. And if we want freedom, we need to know all our options. I love options, though. That's
exactly. Well, and I think the thing that no one really tells us, certainly it was a huge bloody surprise to me, but maybe I just missed the day that we talked about that, was how much we can lose when we are in that place of growing developmentally. So, and how sort of scary it can be to step into a new place of being curious about who we are now when we are liberated from the stories that might not have been ours, but we have believed they were. So one of the things that happened to me as I've been kind of moving through this place of sort of healing physically, but also trying to heal the story, is that I was shocked by how frightened I was that I suddenly had all of this life in front of me. Like, it just felt incredibly agoraphobic almost. Like, I didn't just have 5 years left on the planet, I have potentially 50. And what the hell am I going to do with all that time, right? So it was really fascinating to me that actually what was, in every kind of way of looking at this, a massive gift and a huge relief and opportunity, that actually my response was some fear and some shame at how that felt quite terrifying to me. So not only just feeling the fear of, what am I going to do, but also then the shame at having the fear, but also the kind of recognition that I was almost grieving for my former self, because even though I wasn't wholly conscious of that story, I kind of knew who I was in that. Like, I know how to get stuff done. I have and you and I have talked about this a lot, but in our personal conversations, that I have a really strong kind of archetypal masculine way of being in the world. Like, I'm pretty productive. I'm action oriented. And so this has been a real invitation to go into something that is about not moving, not acting, but being, and, really exploring what might be present right now. So it's layered, right? It's not just a very straightforward process when we change our story.
Well, and what I am thinking about, what is also probably part of that, right? Equality. I think it's even kind of emerging for me is this new trust and ease, right? Not easy.
Yeah.
And that to me brings up all kinds of, well, you're privileged,
Yeah.
what is this ease? I mean, like, because people who say things are easy, I'm like, I give them the side eye, right? I'm like,
Mm.
okay, have you had,
Mm.
maybe you've just had a trust fund your whole life, right? But often I think when we're integrating and rewriting new stories, some of the things that we used to judge, right, which was our shadow side, we have to start to play with, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm curious about, because I've seen this with a lot of my clients right now. This is coming up a lot in their work lives, because when people think they have to grip so tightly, right, then they're eating for energy, they're unwinding with alcohol at the end of the day. And they're not necessarily like their work, which they once loved, has lost its luster. And
Yeah.
these are people that are very much like you and I, like strong masculine energy, great at being productive, know how to get shit done. And then to trust that ease, it's not only do you have to be okay with having a level of ease, but then you're even like, you have to trust it. Like
Yeah.
there's like two stages of that.
Well, and I think that something that is happening in our culture more broadly, certainly in Western culture more broadly right now, is that I think, and this is just my experience, so this may not be true for everyone listening, but what I'm seeing as part of things like Black Lives Matter and Me Too and this truth serum that we are all suddenly taking is that we are starting to see that what was once a story of uh, women needing to feel like imposters or somehow they weren't capable or they wouldn't be promoted or noticed unless they worked twice as hard as men, where people of color have felt like there is a story that I'm living out, which is I have to be twice as good to belong, to be noticed. And I think there is absolutely legitimacy in that. I think what we're also seeing is that these were stories that were given to us. They were never true. They were just bullshit lies that were propagated by the people who held the power, right? And so you get someone like Michelle Obama who says, well, hey, we're often told that we need to be better, right? We need to really earn our place at the table. And she's saying, well, actually, I've sat at the table and there isn't a ton of original thinking going on. So
I
we
love
need more people at the table, right?
when she said that, I felt like all of my corporate days were validated.
Well, exactly. And I think this is the thing that I feel incredibly despairing at the state of some of our leadership, but also incredibly hopeful, because I'm from New Zealand and, although I live in the UK and have done for many years, but I see leadership that's being done differently by Jacinda Ardern. And I just think, oh, this is what it can look like.
And I think that's the challenge, right? Is to your point. Yeah. I'm thinking years back, we had Sheryl Sandberg come in and tell us all to lean in, right? And so we thought our choices were lean out or lean in. And actually, This is going out in my upcoming newsletter about McKinsey did a study and basically women leaned in and I'm oversimplifying the results, but they worked twice as hard and, didn't
It didn't make a damn bit of difference, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
What they got was fatigue,
Yeah. I remember reading the introduction to Sheryl Sandberg's book and just basically swearing quite loudly and throwing it on the floor because I was someone who was in a really senior corporate job and I leaned the hell in and made a ton of sacrifices and it didn't make a damn bit of difference.
Yeah. And so I love your point about there's new emerging stories because it's kind of hard to say, like, what will that really actually look like unless you have someone there to say, oh, I want that, right? Like, oh my God, these other two options are insane and they're not working. And I know in my field, I think of like the two extremes of like diet culture or just like, there's body positivity movement has been co-opted a little bit, right? But the people who are co-opting it, it's like still kind of the same thing of like, not the original one, but what it's become, right? Because we're still filtering it through that capitalistic, white, cisgender, able-bodied lens. Yeah. And so a new story of like, wait, you don't have to like be all natural or all medicated, and you don't have to be in a paleo camp or a vegan camp, and you can pay attention to your emotional health because that's what's really connected to our well-being as much as nutrition and exercise. That's slowly emerging. I think of my clients as like offering that news story, but until you see it, you kind of think, oh, this is always going to have to be hard, right?
Yeah.
Always going to have to deal with this on some level. And the possibilities that we're talking about, and like what is it the prime minister, is she called the prime minister of New Zealand?
Yeah, the prime
Yeah.
minister. Yeah. Yeah.
You just see that and you're like, oh, I don't have to choose. I want it all. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I
Well,
mean,
and just how you get someone from, and this is why I think, I love and wholeheartedly respect and recommend Desiree Adaway's work for just
oh,
understanding what the difference is between diversity and inclusion. And I love the way that she phrases inclusion as not so much that you're welcome here, but we designed this for you. Right. And
I love
how,
that line.
yeah, it's just like, this is what I think about what Jacinda Ardern is doing, is saying, we're designing a government for you, right? We are recognizing that we have an enormous mental health issue in New Zealand. We recognize that we need more money for housing, that New Zealand has one of the highest youth suicide rates in the known universe. We have a really high rate of domestic violence. And so that means that the government that is designing the country for everyone to feel safe in must address those issues. And that means that we don't put something like economic growth at the top of the agenda. We actually say mental health care is much more important right now. It doesn't mean that the economic growth isn't important. It's just that right now it's not the priority. We're doing okay. So we have to prioritize these other things. And that then lifts everybody, right? So we take care of the folks who are struggling the most, and that lifts everybody. And for me, that is a framework of leadership that is so damn rare. It feels like a different language when we hear it. But actually, we just lean into it and we think, oh, that's how we run our families, right? The person with the greatest need gets the most love and attention for the period of time they need it. So I think we just, it's the way we reframe our stories about what's okay, what's not okay, our expectations for ourselves, they can shift on a dime. It just takes someone, I think, to mentor that for us, to demonstrate what's possible.
I love that question because when I think of how America was designed, you've got patriarchy first, then you have racism, which without racism, you can't have capitalism.
Yeah.
And, when you look at that, I'm thinking the history of the healthcare system. I mean, it is all capitalism, racism. I mean, who they've experimented on, who they not. And it's all, and then just patriarchy. I mean, women's bodies have barely been studied, right? And everything is about, I'm thinking they tried a male birth control pill and like men were starting to feel a little bit of pain. And so they stopped it immediately.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a woman in the UK, Caroline, I think it's Criado Perez, and she's written this book, Invisible Women, that's just been published in the UK. And it's all about how women have been made invisible in all kinds of data, in all kinds of data sets, which sounds perhaps a bit benign, but we just have to think about, what do we use data sets for? It's for healthcare decisions, for pharmaceutical choices, it's for policy decisions, and who gets impacted. So from these quite sort of seemingly innocuous things like what's the standard temperature of an office, because women tend to run a little cooler than men, then women have to sit in cold offices. And we just think about, what does that do to a human body over 20 years, right?
There's an article I'm actually including in my newsletter how it decreases women's productivity, actually.
Yeah, exactly. And then there is, these other things about, what does that mean for, health policy? And you start to see that because we have taken man as the absolute and woman as the adjoiner, it's sort of like the the add-on, like literally Adam and Eve. It's
I know.
right.
Adam's rib, right?
Yeah. That is still how we are kind of running our world, how we're making decisions. It just takes someone to point this out to us, and then we go, oh, hang on a second, that doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah, this is so tangential, but we were at Carlos's best friend's wedding like 10 years ago. It was in Costa Rica, and the priest for some reason had to fly out. And so Carlos had to translate the mass because the English speaking priest had left. And even though Carlos is Portuguese, he can speak Spanish. And he was doing that line, like they had included the reading of like the rib. And and I'm rolling my eyes, and he's like, I was thinking about not even translating it because I knew you were in the audience. But he's like, it wasn't our ceremony. I was like, yeah. But I was like, oh, it just makes me so angry. But I think that's so important in tying these low expectations is we want to put it, especially in America, we think everything's so individualistic. We want to put all of that on you, right? Like the culture says it's all you as an individual.
Yeah.
Versus I know with my clients, they start to realize, wow, that was these low expectations and my distrust in my body or hating myself for this or doubting myself for this. As they start to change their story, they're like, that was given to me. I didn't even know it was given to me. I thought it was my own. And now I'm giving it back, right?
Well, and it's an insidious story, right? It's like from childhood, we are taught to look to others to tell us what to do, to never trust ourselves, to never trust our bodies. If we're feeling any kind of emotion that is uncomfortable, that isn't, happiness at all times, then we should seek to find something that will appease or alleviate that emotion. We should not trust ourselves to be with it, and we shouldn't trust the innate intelligence of it. So, buy this thing, eat this food. These are the things that will help you to feel better, not you can help yourself feel better. So from this very, very young age, we are told time and time again, do not trust yourself. Buy the solution. Seek expertise from someone else. You cannot know yourself as well as we do. And it's this kind of insidious story that, of course, we don't trust ourselves. How can you go through your life hearing that day in, day out and know that there is another story you could believe? And I think that's where, the power of developmental psychology really sits, is that the level of emotional maturity, the range that we have, the complexity that we can hold when we start to challenge these stories and see them for what they are, is that we, by proxy of just questioning the truth of that, questioning the motivation and the intention behind the stories we're subjected to, and seeing them for what they are, which is often an outcome, and sometimes unintended and sometimes incredibly overt response to the fact that we live in these systemic oppressive systems of, like you just described, the patriarchy, racism, the capitalist consumer-based culture. And we forget that we can trust the earth, right? The earth has an innate intelligence. We have seasons, we have tides, we have, all of these natural resources that are there to sustain us. We can trust our bodies as well because we're creatures, we are part of nature. And it feels to me like until we start really challenging this kind of narrative that says you cannot trust yourself, you cannot trust your body, and by proxy you must trust us, corporate America, then we will be these kind of unwitting handmaidens, I hesitate to use the word, to these systems, right? We're kind of participating without realizing that we even have a choice. So, this is one of the reasons why I think your work is just so important, because what you're saying is don't believe the noise. Don't believe it. The emperor has no clothes.
None.
Not a stitch.
I feel like I've been living in that parable since 2016, November 2016. Yeah. And I think one of the things that you just said that I think is so important for people to realize, even if you don't think you are making a choice, you are.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I think, I'm sure, Sas, your clients come to realize, like, oh, I thought life was just kind of happening, but I was actually choosing this story that came from maybe my family, which also came from the culture, and all these ripple effects. And I think that's important for people to realize as you start to examine low expectations and your own story is when you don't feel like you have a choice, what choice are you making in
Yeah.
that moment? And it could be to put up with this. It could be to go with the flow. It could be to
Mm.
avoid,
Yeah.
accommodate.
And I think that's the thing. Like, we don't have to challenge every damn story, right? Because that gets
Oh, no.
exhausting.
Oh God, no,
but,
that's
but
the capitalistic.
yeah,
You've got to be super productive or you're
yeah,
not.
yeah, yeah. But I think there's something about just recognizing that you can reflect, you can kind of pause and just ask yourself, what choice do I want to make? And something will bubble up, right? Something will come to you. It may or may not be your inner voice, your intuition, your soul, your innate intelligence. Something will bubble up. Who knows what that is? But you can trust that. You can just be open to it, curious about it, and that will over time become a louder voice that will allow you to really question and take action that is based on what your innate intelligence is telling you rather than what the world is instructing you to do. And I think just living a life that is based on that is so much more just fulfilling, right?
Ugh, and powerful and
Yeah.
impactful. Yeah. Oh my God, I love this. Sas, one more question before we wrap up. What are you integrating? I know we've talked a little bit about you having this, wow, I'm going to have a lot more time, but specifically about your body, because your creativity's been on fire and
Mm.
it's been shifting and changing. So I'm wondering what you're integrating about your body as you work through this I've got time story, basically, and that I can
It's,
trust my body.
it's such a great question. I think one of the impacts that I'm experiencing and kind of living through and trying to integrate right now is this realization that not only can I trust my body, but I can trust myself. And so years and years ago, I trained in conflict resolution, right? Because I am a recovering people pleaser and I needed some skills to deal with conflict. And that has been super helpful, no doubt about it. But I always had this undercurrent story that, yeah, but that's just kind of following a script. It's not really being okay with conflict. It's just given me something else to do with it. And I've realized that having died and come back a couple of times, that I'm sort of no longer afraid of conflict, or I'm no longer afraid of being judged. So it's not that I don't care what people think, because I do, and there are obviously layers to that, and there are some people who I really do care what they think. But I'm no longer afraid of being criticized or being judged or being rejected or abandoned by people, because I kind of feel like I've got me in a newer, deeper way. And what that is meaning, I think, is that I am feeling much more creative. Like, there are just things that I want to do and say and make and write. And one of the really interesting things that came to me very quickly after I came back from surgery was this desire to kind of get to, and I love the kind of irony of this, or perhaps not the irony, but the theme of this, of wanting to get to the heart of matters. And so things like poetry has been something that I've dabbled with over the years, but it's become a kind of practice for me now, where if I'm sitting with something that is confusing or brings up a lot of emotion for me, one of the things that I'm doing to integrate each thing is try and write something that is poetry, something like poetry. I have no idea if it's any good, right? I have no idea. But I'm okay with sharing it and like letting it stand and not really caring how that's received, because it's just sort of coming through me, if you like. So there is this sort of, there's kind of layers to that integration. But ultimately it's come back to this idea that like I can trust myself. Whatever happens, if I offend someone unintentionally, I can repair that. It's okay. And actually it's really about like just telling the truth and saying, oh, I really didn't mean that, and I'm so sorry I hurt your feelings, and here's what I intended, and can we talk about that? Or equally from a kind of boundary setting perspective, like, someone who just wants to be like, have their opinion taken into account, and actually that doesn't matter so much to me. It's like, I get that you want to be included in this, but I just want to run this myself. So, it's okay. It's okay for you to not be included in this. And I hope you understand why. It's so there is this kind of freedom to play with what trust and trusting myself looks like in public and looks like as a lived experience rather than just a theory. And I'm trusting my body's intelligence to kind of give me a sense of when that feels good and when that feels slightly uncomfortable, but it's still the right thing for me versus, oh no, I think something's off here and there's something unfinished here. We need to talk more. So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, Ellie, but
Totally.
that's kind of where I'm at right now. It's a bit messy, but it's good. It feels clean is what it feels. It feels like I'm just feeling stuff and acknowledging it. And sometimes that means communicating it. And sometimes it just means moving on. But yeah, it feels good.
I love that because part of why we fear conflict is because of patriarchy and white supremacy, right? That's an internalized conflict is bad versus can be very constructive. And
someone has to win, right? In the patriarchy, when there's conflict, somebody has to be the winner.
Yeah. Instead of, wait a second, what if we can both come out of this better than before,
Yeah.
No, I love that. I love that. Oh, so much rich wisdom. Sas, where can people find more of you? We will obviously have all the links to your podcast and website and to follow you on Insta, but where can people, if they're dying to do it right now, can find you?
Yeah, well, my website is saspetherick.com. And I guess the cool thing that I would say, if you're interested in exploring your self-doubt, is that I have this quiz that allows you to kind of open up to what kind of patterns, archetypal patterns you might be experiencing just in terms of how you experience and respond to self-doubt. So that's part of a grounded theory research study that I did last year. And I think it's about 5,000 people have taken the quiz now. It's really cool. So it'll give you an archetype for your self-doubt and some hot tips for experiments you can try out in the world to start interrupting those patterns. So yeah, if that's okay for me to share that.
Of course. Because once people start getting those first results of like, this is better than I could have expected, then they keep going and you keep it raising your expectations. And when we have really big, meaningful goals is I think when we continue to show up for them rather than let me just get out of pain. It's like, no, let's get some freedom here.
Yeah.
Freedom,
Sure. And that's the thing. I think self-doubt is always going to tell us that there's something we have to protect ourselves from, so we better not do it. So if you're holding yourself back from those goals or holding yourself back, having those low expectations, then really looking at why that's there and just questioning if that is just outdated, inherited, or just something that isn't working for you and you want to try a new way, then that can just really help.
I love that. Those are some powerful questions to end on. Thank you so much for being here, Sas.
Total pleasure. Thanks, Allie.
Thank you, Health Rebels, for tuning in today. Have a reaction, question, or want the transcript from today's episode? Find me at allieshapiro.com. I'd love if you leave a review on Apple Podcast and tell your friends and family about Insatiable. It helps us grow our community and share a new way of approaching health in our bodies. Thanks for engaging in a different kind of conversation. And remember, always, your body truths are unique, profound, real, and liberating.